Have you ever made a decision not because you truly wanted to, but because someone made you feel like you had to? Like you owed them? Like walking away would make you the villain of the story? That's the hidden weight of guilt. A deeply human emotion that, when twisted, becomes a tool for control. Guilt is supposed to be a compass, a whisper from within that nudges us back when we've strayed from our values. But in the hands of a manipulator, it becomes something else entirely. A silent puppeteer pulling invisible strings, dictating your choices, your actions, and even your sense of self-worth. When guilt is weaponized, it doesn't just influence your behavior. It chips away at your identity, at your autonomy, at your very sense of freedom. It thrives in the shadows, lurking beneath seemingly innocent words, subtle actions, and even silence. Guilt manipulation is a psychological strategy that's often used by people who feel entitled to your actions, your time, and your emotional energy. It's the person who makes you feel responsible for their happiness, or worse, their misery, so that you're always walking on eggshells, trying to avoid their disapproval. It's a deeply ingrained tactic that we often don't even realize is happening until it's too late. And by then, the effects can be profound. You've probably heard someone say, "After everything I've done for you," or "How could you do this to me?" These words may seem like simple expressions of hurt, but in reality, they are designed to manipulate you, to make you feel like you owe the other person something. Your time, your attention, your loyalty. The goal is to put the burden of their emotions on your shoulders, to make you feel responsible for their well-being, even if it comes at the expense of your own happiness. What's truly insidious about guilt manipulation is that it doesn't always come from a place of malice. It often comes from a place of vulnerability or insecurity. But this doesn't change the fact that the emotional toll it takes on you can be devastating. Manipulators know exactly how to exploit your natural empathy. They understand that when you care about someone, you want to make them happy, to protect them, to ensure they feel seen and heard. They play on this desire, twisting it into something that benefits them while slowly stripping away your own sense of self. The problem is, guilt is an incredibly powerful emotion. It taps into your deepest fears, the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being good enough. When used strategically, guilt becomes a force that can bend you to someone else's will without you even realizing it. The result is that you may begin to doubt your own needs, your own desires, and ultimately your own worth. Consider the dynamics of a romantic relationship where one partner uses guilt as a manipulation tactic. The manipulator might say things like, "I gave up everything for you," or "You're always putting yourself first, never thinking of me." At first, these comments might seem like simple complaints, harmless even. But over time, they begin to erode the foundation of the relationship. Suddenly, you feel like everything you do is never enough, that every decision you make is selfish. The manipulator capitalizes on this self-doubt, convincing you that if you truly cared, you would sacrifice your own needs and desires for theirs. But in reality, their intentions aren't to foster mutual respect or understanding. They're to gain control over you, to ensure that your actions are dictated by their emotional state. The manipulation doesn't stop with words. Sometimes it takes the form of actions, or more specifically, inactions. A manipulative person may use the silent treatment to punish you for not doing what they want. They withdraw their affection, their attention, and their support, all to make you feel like you've done something wrong, like you've broken an unspoken rule. This tactic often leaves you questioning what you did to deserve their coldness, leading you to second-guess your behavior and, in the process, giving them more control over your emotional state. The fear of rejection and the longing for approval can become so overwhelming that you start to mold yourself into someone you're not, all to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of being shunned or criticized. But guilt manipulation isn't limited to romantic relationships. It can be found in every area of our lives. Think about the dynamics within families. Parents may use guilt to control their children, often unknowingly. "I sacrificed so much for you," a parent might say, or "I gave up my dreams to raise you." While these statements may stem from a place of love, they can also be used to create a sense of indebtedness. The child may begin to feel responsible for the parent's happiness or well-being, leading them to make choices based on guilt rather than their own desires. This creates a cycle where the child's needs and aspirations are pushed aside in favor of trying to meet the emotional needs of the parent. And the more the child gives in, the more they lose their sense of self. In the workplace, guilt manipulation can also be prevalent. A manager may say, "I'm relying on you to get this project done," or, "If you don't complete this, the whole team will suffer." These statements may seem like simple workplace expectations, but they can subtly plant the seed of guilt, making the employee feel responsible for the success or failure of the entire team, even if the burden isn't theirs to bear. The fear of letting down others, of being seen as uncommitted or unprofessional, can push an individual to overextend themselves, often at the cost of their own health and well-being. In this context, guilt becomes a tool for getting the most out of someone without considering their personal limitations. But how does guilt become such a powerful tool for manipulation in the first place? To understand this, we need to look at the psychology of guilt itself. Guilt is an emotion that stems from a sense of responsibility for causing harm or failing to live up to our values. It's a moral compass, guiding us to right the wrongs we've committed or to make amends with others we may have hurt. However, when guilt is manipulated, it distorts this natural process. Instead of motivating us to make amends out of genuine desire for growth or reconciliation, it pressures us into action through shame and fear of disapproval. In many ways, guilt manipulation is a reflection of an imbalance of power. The manipulator seeks to maintain control over the victim, often by preying on their fear of losing love, respect, or validation. The victim, in turn, begins to feel like their worth is tied to their ability to meet the needs and demands of the manipulator. This creates a toxic dynamic where the manipulator's emotions dictate the victim's actions, and the victim's sense of self becomes increasingly dependent on the approval of the manipulator. This cycle can continue for years, often going unnoticed by both parties. The manipulator may genuinely believe they are justified in their actions, while the victim may feel too guilty or afraid to break free. The result is a relationship built on control, fear, and emotional manipulation. A relationship where one person is always in the driver's seat and the other is constantly playing catch-up. Guilt is often a silent, invisible force, subtle in its operation, yet incredibly powerful when used with intention. The complexity of its manipulation stems from its deeply personal nature. We all carry with us a moral compass, an internal guide that tells us when we've done something wrong. It's a tool for personal growth, a way to reflect and correct our actions. But when someone wields guilt with intention, they understand how easily it can distort that compass, turning it into a tool for their own advantage. The moment guilt is weaponized, it shifts from being a guide to becoming a form of control. Manipulators exploit this weakness in human nature, using guilt as a hidden lever to make you act against your own interests. When we talk about guilt as a manipulative tool, we must address its deeply emotional impact. Unlike other forms of manipulation that may be more outwardly aggressive, like shouting or threats, guilt is subtle. It's not always about forcing someone to do something through fear. Instead, it's about planting the seed of doubt in their mind, making them believe that the action they want to take will somehow be morally wrong. It's the "I told you so" without the words, the disappointment in someone's eyes when they don't get what they want. And it doesn't stop there. Over time, these tactics seep into your consciousness, causing you to second-guess every decision you make. It's the kind of manipulation that erodes your confidence without you ever realizing it's happening. You don't just feel responsible for the other person's happiness. You begin to believe it's your sole duty. This kind of emotional manipulation can even change the way you view yourself. When guilt is used against you, it can distort your sense of self-worth, making you feel like you're always falling short. You become trapped in a cycle of perpetual self-doubt, wondering whether your decisions are truly your own, or merely the result of someone else's emotional coercion. Eventually, you may begin to take responsibility for things you never should have. It could be something as simple as missing a social gathering, where the manipulator insists that your absence is a betrayal, or perhaps it's a larger issue, where a loved one manipulates your sense of duty, convincing you that you owe them more than you're capable of giving. One of the most insidious aspects of guilt manipulation is how it thrives on your innate desire to be loved and accepted. As humans, we are wired for connection. We want to feel valued, seen, and heard. We want to know that the people around us care about our well-being and that our actions reflect our moral integrity. Guilt manipulation takes advantage of this universal need by creating the illusion that the manipulator's affection is conditional on your behavior. They make you feel as though their love is something that must be earned, something that you must prove you deserve. And this creates a terrifying internal conflict. On one hand, you want to stand up for yourself, to make choices that are best for you. On the other hand, you're terrified of losing that love, of not being enough. So you give in. You do things you don't want to do. You say yes when you want to say no. You push your own needs aside to meet theirs, all in the name of preserving a connection that, in reality, is built on manipulation. The most dangerous part of this dynamic is that it can become so ingrained that you don't even recognize it as manipulation anymore. Over time, you begin to internalize the guilt. You start to believe that your emotional needs are less important than the needs of others, that your happiness is secondary to the happiness of those around you. The manipulator may not even need to say anything anymore. The mere thought of disappointing them causes the guilt to rise up in you. It becomes a reflex, a gut reaction that tells you to apologize, to make amends, to do whatever it takes to avoid their displeasure. But the more you comply, the more they continue to control your actions. It's a cycle that only grows worse the longer it goes on. Now you might wonder, why does guilt manipulation work so well? Why is it so effective? The answer lies in our own biology. When we feel guilty, our body responds. We experience physiological reactions like increased heart rate, tension, or even nausea. These responses are linked to the emotional weight of the situation, a reminder that our actions have consequences. But for a manipulator, this emotional response is exactly what they're after. They exploit your empathy, your desire to do right by others, and they use it to make you feel like you owe them something. They know that the more you feel guilty, the more likely you are to act in their favor. And over time, that sense of guilt becomes tied to the relationship itself. Every time you feel the weight of it, it reinforces the power imbalance, and the manipulator gains more control. What's even more alarming is the long-term effect of guilt manipulation on your emotional health. Constantly giving into guilt can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and even depression. It's not just the immediate emotional toll, it's the erosion of your sense of self. When you're constantly forced to prioritize someone else's needs over your own, you lose sight of who you are, what you want, and what truly matters to you. Over time, you begin to feel empty, exhausted, and unfulfilled, all because you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to how much you sacrifice for others. And the more you give, the less you receive in return. This is the tragic cycle of guilt manipulation. The more you comply, the more the manipulator demands, and the more you lose yourself in the process. But how can you break free from this toxic cycle? The first step is recognizing that you're being manipulated. Understanding the tactics of guilt manipulation is key to reclaiming your power. If you find yourself constantly apologizing for things you didn't do, or feeling responsible for someone else's emotions, it's time to take a step back and reevaluate the relationship. Are you making decisions based on your own values and needs? Or are you simply trying to avoid guilt and disapproval? Once you identify the patterns, you can begin to set boundaries. Boundaries are crucial in any healthy relationship, but they are especially important when dealing with a manipulative individual. By clearly defining what is and isn't acceptable, you can protect your emotional well-being and stop the cycle of guilt from taking hold. Another important step is learning to trust your instincts. Guilt may be a powerful emotion, but it's also a deeply personal one. You don't need anyone else to tell you what you should or shouldn't feel guilty about. If someone is trying to make you feel responsible for their emotions, that's a red flag. Trust yourself enough to know that you are not responsible for their happiness. And remember, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not manipulation. Finally, understand that breaking free from guilt manipulation isn't easy. It takes time, courage, and self-compassion. But the rewards are worth it. When you stop letting guilt control your actions, you open the door to a more authentic, fulfilling life. You regain your sense of self, and most importantly, you reclaim your emotional freedom. You are worthy of love, respect, and happiness, not because you've sacrificed everything for